Hello, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm just gonna do a little chatting. I'm gonna be talking about some of the quirks I've learned and encountered while collecting watches, especially with some like the odd shapes. So this topic I'm gonna be talking about like some of the stuff. It's not set in stone. It's just my preference and some of my experience in like watch sizing, stuff like that. So yeah, the first thing I want to talk about is like how do I decide if a watch is too big? And I think that's a topic that a lot of people kind of think about when they purchase a watch or plan on purchasing. So I think the first thing you should do is probably just measure your wrist circumference. So just get a measuring tape, measure it around. Mine is 7.5 inch, about 19 centimeters. So when you do measure it, you do want to kind of remember to measure where you like to wear your watch. So I typically like to wear my watch above the bone a little bit. Some people like it to wear it below the bone, so you would measure it here. So yeah, the circumference is kind of a good baseline to know, because when you go on websites and YouTube, other YouTube recommendations, they may kind of talk about that, what their wrist is and how it fits on them. So you kind of have like a little gauge with that measurement in mind. But I actually like to use a different method. So the other method I learned over the years is to actually measure the diameter of the wrist, or the width of the wrist. So let's say my wrist. So I typically wear it about here. And you kind of, when you measure it, you don't want to like squeeze down the tissue. You just kind of want to like hover around it, because that's what your that's your true wrist width, I guess. So my wrist width is about 63.4. It kind of fluctuates with temperature and stuff, but yeah, around 63, 62. So the rule I use is that the lug to lug of your watch should kind of hover around 80% of that measurement. So 63, 62, 80% is around 50. So in my mind, how I gauge if a watch is too big is I don't really want a watch above 50 for the lug to lug. So I'll give you some examples. I have this watch here. Hold on. So this is a watch I kind of assembled myself. I don't usually wear it because it's a skeleton watch, and also the other thing is it's actually quite big. The first watch I assembled, I did want to work on a decent sized movement, so I bought like a standard size movement, maybe a little bit large case. So this watch is, the lug to lug is 52.5, so it's above 50. And if I wear this watch, like, it still fits fine, and it's, you can get away with it, but it is a little bit kind of just taking over my entire wrist. Like, if you want to have this be the centerpiece, you want everyone to look at it, yeah, that's fine. But That's usually not how I like to wear the watches. So this is 52.5, and I find it just a little bit too large. So the next one, like let's say yeah, so this one, the Credor, the Lug-to-Lug with the bracelet, it was 50. I measured it. Without the bracelet, it's more like 46 point something, 0.3 or something. And this watch, you know, I think it's like kind of just right. The I'll put in and insert a picture of the with the bracelet at 50 Lug-to-Lug. Let's see, you can see how that looks. But yeah, 46, it looks, I think, just about right. You see a little bit of the band, and then the watch is in like, you know, 2 in your face. The I think this BMW watch, the Lug-to-Lug, is also 46, and you know, I think that would be, so anything above 50, I think it's a little too much. Or for people watching, anything above 80% of your wrist width, I think it's a little too much. That's just my preference. So the next thing I want to talk about is the thickness. So I think thickness is kind of hard to judge. I typically find that 14 millimeter is kind of the max for anything that's like kind of elegant or dressy. Well, I think once you go above 14, it's really more like sporty or tool watch territory. But it's not really, there's not really a good explanation or why. It's just my experience. So we talked about the thickness, talked about the Lug-to-Lug. So let's talk about case diameter. Case diameter is probably the most commonly used measurement to gauge how a watch wears. So it's like with round watches, it's very easy because they give you like the diameter, and it's based on a circle, so you can kind of gauge with different sizes and stuff. But even though that's like a very basic one, like there's other aspects that also determines what a watch like wears like and what the measurement says. So you got like the watch bezel, and like the color of the dial, and even the thickness, they all kind of play a role in like how a watch wears like instead of the actual measurement. So the example would be like this one and this one. So both of these watches are measuring at 40 millimeter in diameter. But this watch, Julius, the bezel is super minimal. There's almost no bezel other than these small little cushion sides. And then this one, it's not a thick bezel, but compared to the Julius, it's much thicker. And there's also a little bit of a cushion side too. So when looking at these watches, I think this one appears to be a little larger, but then it's also kind of offset with the color of this watch, because this is a darker color, black. It may help kind of reduce the size of what it wears like, because it's kind of hard to like do like an exact math on these, but yeah, in general, I think smaller bezel just makes a watch bigger. And to a smaller effect, the color has a small effect, but not as much as the bezel, I think. Because I think overall, I still think this is a bigger watch. But they both measure at 40 mm. The thickness of the watch, I don't think it really affects what a watch wears like, but rather it kind of should match the watch's overall size. Like example, like a tiny 33, 32 millimeter thick watch would look kind of strange. Like, you know, you have 32 millimeter and then the thickness is 18 millimeter. That would look really weird. But also I think like thickness also kind of plays into like how it slides under the cuff. Because sometimes you'll have, you know, the thickness of the watch, but as it gets to the edge, it kind of tapers into a much thinner profile. So it gives you the illusion that it's a thinner watch, and it may actually help with sliding under the cuff because it has this progression for the fabric to glide over. Whereas if it's like a continuous block, it may just appear thicker and will not slide under a cuff. Okay, so let's see what's next. So we talk about like how a watch wears like, and I said it's usually the measurement they give you is a case diameter because most watches are circular, so they use diameter. But what happens when you get into like watches like rectangular or, you know, square? So I think the main thing is like with the rectangular, when they give you the measurement, they're still giving you a diameter because they're still basing it off of a circle. But what you actually should do is measure both the width and length. So like this watch, it measures at 36. And when you measure the length, don't measure the lug to lug, measure the actual case length. 40. So, you know, you read on paper, this is a 36 millimeter watch, but when you wear it, it definitely doesn't wear like a 36. So why is that? That's because you got to calculate the surface area of a rectangle for these kind of watches. So you can like, you know, do your math, calculate the surface area of a rectangle, and you match it with what a circular watch surface area is equivalent to. So let me show you. One sec. So yeah, here you got 3 watches. The Slava is kind of like a 37 millimeter watch. The Brew is a 38 millimeter, and the Credor is a 39 millimeter. So, you know, looking just from afar, this actually kind of looks like the smallest, whereas these looks larger. And like I said, you should write a list of all the different diameters and the area they cover. So, you know, this you can just find it online. And then what you do is you measure the height, width of a rectangle, and then you calculate the area and you kind of match it to where it falls on this list. So if you measure this, width is 38, height is 42, and then you do the calculation, and it actually comes out to be about this number, 1450. So it tells you that even though the measurement is 38, which kind of wears more closer to 43, 42, and you know, comparing to a watch that's about 39 to 40, you can kind of see that might be the case. Yeah. For the Slava, same thing. You do the measurement, and it comes out to be around 41-ish. Yeah. So, and also, like, you know, between the two watch, even though this area may be smaller on the Slava, it still kind of appears around the same size, if not maybe even a little bigger. And that might be due to how thin this bezel is. I mean, it basically has like very minimal bezel, whereas this bezel is a little thicker. So that might play into a role. And also this is a white dial, so it might make it appear larger. So yeah, I'd say both of these wear more kind of like 43-ish, to be honest. Okay, so let's see what else I want to talk about. So this measurement of different sizes, you can do that for Octagon too. Like, you know, you can go online and find out, calculating the area of an octagon. So even though this watch is 39.3 in diameter, if you calculate an octagon based on that measurement, the area is more close to 40, 1250. So it tells you, like, you know, it wears just slightly larger. So this watch kind of wears like a 40. The like square watches, same thing. Like this watch, this is my smallest watch. So let's do a measurement. 31. So, you know, 31 is super small, but because of the square, also 31. You do the area of the square, and then you match it up, and it kind of is more closer to 35. You know, it's not a complete, you know, sharp square, so you could say there's a little bit of less area because of the angle. So you could say like 34.5 or something. So, you know, if it's like a true 31, I think on my wrist it would look a little bit ridiculous, but 35 still kind of works. It is on the smaller side, I'll agree. But yeah, so you can do that for square, for octagon, rectangle. For cushion case, it's a little bit more tricky because, you know, you can kind of argue it is like a square, but the curvature is so much more significant. So what I like to do for cushion case to estimate is use like a pentagon or hexagon, and looking at the area where a circle fits inside one of those shapes and the corners protruding out. So like if you have a cushion case with relatively smaller cushions, I say use maybe a hexagon to you know, you would find the difference between the hexagon and the circle, and then you have the area of these little pieces. But because it's hexagon, there's 6 of them, so you would, you know, divide by 6 and then multiply by 4, and then you'll have a rough estimate of these little areas. You add them to that, and then you try to match it up. From my experience, cushion case that's relatively small cushioned adds about 1 millimeter, whereas a cushion case that has larger cushions maybe adds about 2 millimeters to your watch diameter, what it wears like. All right, so let's see. I think that's enough about that. All right, so shifting gear, the next thing I want to talk about is how a watch band or bracelet should taper. So in my mind, I think the role of a band or bracelet is to kind of, other than keeping it strapped to your wrist securely, is to kind of act as a visual guidance towards letting you kind of quickly glance at a watch, because it kind of frames this watch and have your eye kind of focus on it quickly. So I think a taper is a little important. So I think one key aspect I like to really consider is the difference between the lug width and the case diameter. So let's see, what's a good, this one, maybe this one, and maybe the Citizen. Alright, so let's talk about like these three. They all have 20 millimeter lug width, but the case width is very different. So, you know, this watch, the case width is only 26, and this one 31, and this is like 40. So the difference between 26 and 20 lug width is very small. So with these kind of shapes, you really want the band to taper, because you know the watch isn't tapering itself too much. And when you have something that has a big difference from 40 to 20, the case is already doing the tapering itself. So this band could be straight or just have a very minimal taper, and you can get away with a pleasing design. This one's in the middle. This one 31 to 20. It's a little bit of taper on the case, so I still went with the tapering band. So it's kind of like just what you like. The other aspect you need to consider is how long the lugs are. So let's talk. So you got this watch here, Brew. This essentially has no lugs, right? And then you have a watch like this, where the lugs are quite long. So when you have a watch with very short lugs or no lugs, then the case has no taper, because the lug previously did the job to kind of frame the watch. So if you don't have taper on, or you don't have lugs, then your band need to taper, I think. Well, not need, but it would be pleasing to taper. Whereas if you already had relatively long lugs, then from the center point of the case to the edge where the band start, there's already some tapering. So the band itself could just go along not tapering at all, and it'll look okay. So like, you know, if you go on the Brew's website and you look at the bracelet that came with this watch, it's this very nice beads of rice bracelet. Sorry, I think there's some truck outside. But yeah, that band didn't have much taper. It had very little taper, so it looked a little chunky, which is fine if that's the look. Excuse me. And then so I found, and then when you look at their next watch, the Retromatic, that one had like this new bracelet design that has a pretty nice taper. So maybe they got some feedback and they decide to go with that design. And this is a bracelet that kind of mimicked that design from the Retromatic. So the next thing I want to discuss is some of the stuff I've noticed over the years collecting non-traditional shaped watches. Is that I've noticed some watches have very short lugs. It's not completely lugless, but they have very short lugs. Like this one, it's quite short. Or this one here. And I think maybe the reason is because the case sometimes is kind of tall already because of the rectangular design. And if they add longer lugs, the actual lug to lug might be a little too much. But as a kind of effect to that is sometimes you get this like really sharp angle of tapering because the lugs are so short that it has this weird effect on making the band lug width very small, and the tapering itself is super significant. So what you end up causing is you got this band that kind of tapers a bit, and then you got this super sharp transition to a straight case, and it has this weird look. So what I found was good was to kind of get these indented straps so that you can have the band kind of transition a little bit more gracefully. So this one is indented, and this one is actually also indented a bit, so there's a little bit more easier transition. So yeah, let's see. You know, when you have a watch that's relatively standard lug width length, then you don't really need that little indent. It'll work nice. So you know, all said and done, these are just some of my observations I've noticed. You know, every watch is different. It's really down to like just how it looks on your wrist and what you prefer. So you know, like for this Credor, for example, like, you know, the difference between the case width and the lug width is, you know, it's decent. It's from 39 almost, and then 20, which is good. And then it doesn't have super short lugs, but if you look at this lug, I'll add a picture when it had the bracelet on. The angle where this lug tapers and how the bracelet originally tapers down, the angle is very different and it's not very seamless. So you got this weird, like, yeah, weird little transition. So when I got the band, I wanted to do the indent, so it kind of transitioned it very nicely down. So you know, when you glance at your wrist quickly, it's a very pleasing transition, I guess. All right, that was quite a bit of talking about these small little details. So I'm gonna end the video. I think the next video I may do a review of another watch, or maybe I'll just talk a little bit about some miscellaneous stuff that I have used during my watch collection. Thanks.